Hey guys, Bima here today with another meta update video, this time for week 2 of Shadowverse Worlds Beyond. So this is in tangent with the upcoming in-game lobby tournament. So the first one will be running this weekend and then it'll be running every single week after that. I highly recommend everyone give it a try, regardless of if they're a free-to-play player or if they're an experienced player. I have put together a couple of slides to help you guys decide what to play. I have some budget decks available as well for the classes that have them available. So let's check out the slides I prepared for you guys. So what are lobby tournaments? Basically, they run every single weekend. You can participate in one of them. Even if you lose every single game, you get 200 vials and 100 rupees. But the moment you win 2 games, you get 1 card pack ticket, 500 vials, 300 rupees, and 2 park keys. And obviously, if you win every single round, you get enough vials for a legendary of your choice. So it's kind of crazy if you manage to win 4 games in a row. And to be honest, everyone should be trying this. You might just get lucky. I think it's worth playing for sure. All you need to do in order to participate is just be D0 rank and log in at the right time, and you'll be able to participate. So moving along, in terms of the tier list for this particular week, Artifact Portal and Puppet Portal are tier 1. So regardless of which portal deck you play, you should be confident in your chances of winning. But tier 2 currently consists of Midrange Sword, Pixie Forest, and Spellboost Rune. I think no matter which of those 3 decks you play, I think you can definitely compete with the tier 1 decks. I'm personally planning on playing Midrange Sword, so don't worry too much about what you decide to play. If you're on the tier 3 train, it might be a little bit more rough to win 4 games in a row, but even so, I think if you play well on the day and you draw well, there's no reason you can't take it. And if you're playing Abyss, well, I prepared some decks for you guys, but yeah, I think you can get 2 or 3 wins. It should be fine. So next slide is our first deck. So it is Mid-Range Abyss. Nice. So this deck list here, I think got 25 win streak or something like that on the ladder. So if you have all the legendaries for this deck, I think you should definitely try it. You do need 8 legendaries to play this. Or wait. 3 Olivia as well. So you need 11 legendaries to play this deck. So I think one of the reasons we don't see more Abyss is because it's just the most expensive deck in the game. I think even Runecraft is not as expensive as Abyss. So that will contribute to why it's currently in tier 4 status. But there are plenty of people who are in diamond rank. So, I mean, if you want to play Abyss, I don't think it's an issue. Yeah, that emoji should actually say 11, but I mean, whatever, it's fine. So basically, the way you play this deck is your legendaries are the bread and butter of your deck, right? You need to draw them. All of them have insane board clear potential. So Aragavi, Medusa, Cerberus, all of them clear the board. You want to conserve your Super Evo for Cerberus. Cerberus is one of the most broken cards in Shadowverse Worlds Beyond. In fact, if Abyss weren't as weak as it was now, think about all the people complaining about Orcus, and then that is basically Cerberus, except Cerberus is better than Orcus. Effectively, that card is so crazy, it just continually recycles the 2 damage kind of burn, and then eventually the healing and the burn will overwhelm the opponent. It full clears every single board. You play 2 in a row, and you pretty much already put yourself in a huge winning position. And then you can use your burn spells to clear out. And also, you can just outgrind them in general. There's a lot of free evos in this deck. There's a lot of removal, a lot of card draw. I think actually Abyss is not that bad, but it's too expensive for the average person to play, including me. But yeah, I think obviously if you have Abyss, it's not a bad choice for the event, honestly. No memes. All right, next up, we've got Dragon. So I did a video on this recently. There's a new updated list I provided for this one. So this is from the, I believe it's a rank 1 player on the ladder right now. So he's been playing a lot of Face Dragon. So I would recommend this one if you don't want to go into Ramp Dragon. You have 3 Forte already. The Olivia you don't even need, to be honest. You can replace with anything. So if you want to learn how this deck plays, just watch my other video. But effectively, all you need to do is chip away at your opponent's face in the early game. You have really strong early game cards to control the board. And then once you control the board, you can start going face. And then once you successfully get to the mid game, you can start abusing Forte and Aether's Intimidate keyword. So they can't trade into it. And sometimes they can't even kill it, right? And then you can close the game out with Warrior of the Deep that does 6 damage to enemy face. So I think it's definitely a good deck and a good choice for the upcoming weekend. It's not very expensive, and it obviously works. Now, if you want to play Ramp Dragon, that's also an acceptable option, right? So your 2 key priorities with Ramp Dragon is you want to ramp, right? You want to mulligan for Dragon Sign. Blue Fang, I think it's a bit lower of a priority than Dragon Sign because Dragon Sign comes up earlier, but ultimately you want to draw all your ramp, right? And then once you have ramped up to Overflow, you gain access to your powerful AoE clear like Burn Knight, Garu, and Twilight Dragon. And even if your opponent is able to clear those, eventually you'll be able to play Kakaitis. And the moment Kakaitis comes down, if you're not dead, every single turn you get a really high powered card. In fact, with Burn Knight, you actually get an OTK option as well with the 10 cost, right? But all of the cards are so heavily overstated. You've even got a 10 damage Storm. Like basically, once this deck gets online, it's completely doomed for the opponent, right? But your weakness for this deck is one, you need to draw your ramp, and two, you have a window where your opponent can aggro you down. So you need to be very careful in the early game. You need to ramp, and you need to protect your health. But once you get to the mid game and you're clearing their board every turn, you are smooth sailing. So that is Dragon. I think Dragon's a good choice. Next up is Forest. So we've actually got two builds here. It's actually one of the cheapest decks in the game. In fact, the class is so cheap to play. We have two different builds. They both had win streaks in the ladder. You can choose which one you find more suitable for you. But the bottom one only runs one Aria. And I think Aria comes in the starter deck too. So there's not really an excuse for people going, I can't afford a meta deck because, Forest exists and it's really cheap. So regardless of the build, follows a very similar game plan. Effectively, you want to control the board early game and try and combo with Fey Twinkle Toes. And then if you successfully get that online without them clearing too many of your fairies, the 2/2s are very hard for a lot of classes to deal with, and you get to go face with it as well. Afterwards in the mid game, you're not that strong. I think in the mid game, you just want to focus on clearing your opponent's board, getting chip damage in here and there, but you want to actually grind with the amulet. So the 3-cost amulet, it draws you a card every time you combo 3 at end of turn. So that card, I think, is insane. It's why you never run out of cards in hand, and you pretty much outscale a majority of decks. And then once you reach the late game, Roach comes down. And so Roach does 1 extra damage for each card you play that turn. And often you can play 2 Roaches. Your amulet actually bounces a Roach. So you play maybe like 3 Fairies or 4 Fairies, something like that. Drop Roach, 5 damage, bounce it, play Roach again, 6 damage, with Super Evo maybe 14 damage to face, right? Like, obviously, the more 0 costs you have, the more damage you'll deal with Roach. But effectively, this deck is very high skill ceiling, I would say. But you don't really have an excuse. You can't go like, pay to win deck, etc. when this deck exists. And here we have a funny kind of a meme from the original Shadowverse. So Arisa has a bit of a, he's enjoying Roach, as he should be too. So that is Forest in a nutshell. Next up, we have Control Haven. So Control Haven, there's 2 builds. So the first one is a Control Haven build. So it's one of the few true control decks in the game. And what I mean by that is it has so much removal. It has the strongest removal in the game in terms of the 6-cost amulet that clears everything. But you also have cards like Lapis, and Lapis pretty much can't be removed by anything except, ironically, Haven. I think it's the only class that's banished right now. And so once that comes down into the field, it's a ticking time bomb. The game's going to be over one way or the other within the next few turns. So I really like this deck. It's one of the decks I played a lot at the start of the expansion. Basically, there's so many ways to win, right? If you get Lapis down, that's a free win, or without dying, obviously, right? And then you can use John. So you want to time it so your amulets pop at the same time you play John, and then your opponent loses an entire board. You swing with a huge board. They can't clear it. They die. Alternatively, with this deck, you can literally just make them run out of resources, and they'll just give up. And that's the saddest out there, I guess. But why else are you playing control deck? The other deck you can play is Storm Haven. So this one's another build of Haven that focuses on going face. But not in the traditional way. There are a lot of cards that pop from amulets that have Storm keywords, so you can just go face. And there's also a card called Sacred Griffin. So this card has an insane stat line, 6/8, and any amulet you engage will give it Storm. And so Darkhaven Grace is a very common one. So on turn 9, you play Sacred Griffin, you tap the Darkhaven Grace, you buff it +1, Super Evo, and that's like 10 damage to face, right? So you don't really need to do that much initial damage in order to get lethal with this deck. I think this is a relatively more easy Haven deck to play with. I think I would recommend this one more for beginners because you don't need to understand the timings quite as much. And You also want to use Darkhaven Grace to buff, in general, your followers to deal more damage and make sure your opponent can't kill you. And then John comes down at the same turn so your amulet's popping. That's also really hard for your opponent to deal with. Keep in mind for both of these decks, basically when you super evo cards, they don't die to effects that turn. So you can use cards like Unholy Grail and pop it when your super evos in the field, and they won't die. So there's some unexpected pathways to lethal that you should be aware of when playing this deck. Next up, we have Portalcraft. So both of these decks are tier 1, Artifact Portal and Puppet Portal. So with Artifact Portal, I think at the start of the game, you want to try and assess whether or not you're going to build gun nodes or you're going to spam beta by Ramia to win the game. So Portal has a bunch of really overpowered cards. The early game is really strong. You've got the 2-cost guy that brings out a Puppet on Fanfare. That card's insane. It gives you control of the early game and the ability to actually chip your opponent's life even from the very beginning. And then on your turn 5, you can evolve Alouette. The Alouette, you can either get the AoE card to clear the opponent's board and then make it hard for them to answer both cards. Or if your opponent has no board, you just fuse for the 3 damage enemy leader ability, and then 4-4 and 4-6 is quite hard to deal with. And then in the mid game, you just want to clear their board, chip them when you can. And at turn 8, your Orcus is live. And then Orcus is 7 to 8 damage to enemy face. So all of this damage adds up. And so you'll either be able to kill them using beta spam, or you can beat them by dropping the Gundam on turn 10. Both of them are perfectly acceptable, and you actually have to judge which one of those you want to do based on your turn. But you do need to play a little bit of Artifact in order to get the hang of it. So I've only given you an overview, but before going to the tournament, you definitely want to practice a little bit before you play it. Puppet Portal, on the other hand, is quite easy to play, in my opinion, at least, right? You control the early game really efficiently because puppets are broken in terms of controlling the early game board. Like, you don't even need to use your Evo points in the early game because the puppets are just that efficient. And then on top of that, once you get to the mid game, you get cards like Sylvia and Liam, so you can even heal up. And then, of course, on turn 8, that's when it begins. You Super Evo Orcus, you do something like 7 to 9 damage because you're actually a puppet deck. And then you go Orcus again, another 8 damage. They've already taken 16, there's not that much healing. And then you drop Liam, Evo Liam. And then Liam also has burn effects. So Liam would be like anywhere between 8 to 9 damage based on whether or not you Super Evo him or not. And most decks just don't have a way to beat that curve. If you go double Orcus into Liam, practically no decks are going to survive it. They have to either kill you early, which is hard because you control the board, or they have to heal out of it, which is also kind of hard. So these two decks, very strong. If you have access to them, certainly recommend it. It's tier 1 for a reason. But yeah, that's Portalcraft. Okay, so next up we have Spellbooster Rune. So although Dirt Rune technically exists, we don't consider it a true deck at the moment. Practically nobody is playing it. I think if you're playing Rune, you gotta play Spellbooster Rune. Of course, there are no budget decks for Rune. You want to play every single Rune legendary that you can. If you don't play them, you are deliberately weakening your deck, and that can be okay if you're playing on a budget, but that is a budget by not playing 9 copies of the Rune legendaries, right? So I do have 2 lists here that you can play. Now, you can also add Prince of Kaidas as well. Some people enjoy doing that as well. It gives you an OTK. But essentially, Spell Boost is one of the strongest decks in the meta right now, but it's complicated, right? You have a weak early game where people can abuse you, but on turn 5, you stabilize with Anon Grail. You Spell Boost your entire hand. It gives you a 5/5 ward. You can Evo it for 6/6, and you ping something for 3. So basically, your opponent will get some chip damage on you, most likely, but they're not going to hold a board. And then if you go Anon Grey again, you pretty much win against a lot of decks just by that. Now, you want to work out an opportunity where you can drop your entire hand at once. So your Flame Destroyers, your 8/6s, you want to drop that behind your Anon Grey, for instance, make it really hard for them to answer it. And then you drop Kuon, maybe with a Flame Destroyer as well. Things like that, right? You want to go really wide with boards that are hard to answer. And if your opponent can't kill everything on the board, then they're going to take face damage, right? And then that's when you have the option to start Super Evoing Kuon to control the board and hit face. And then on turn 10 onwards, you can even aim for an OTK with Declimb, and Super Evos in general with Kikaitis, etc. And so this is one of the only decks in the game where you can just randomly play like 30 play points worth of cards in a single turn. And it's kind of ridiculous. It feels a little bit high roll, but actually the deck does take a bit of skill to play. But sometimes it's completely out of your control as well. But overall, I think this is still one of the top decks in the format. I think it's just a little bit below, you know, the tier one space, but yeah, definitely you can't go wrong with playing Spell Wizard for this tournament. And finally, my current deck, so Swordcraft. We actually have a budget option for this one as well. So mid-range sword is a deck that I did a deck profile on my YouTube channel earlier. So definitely check that out if you want a more detailed explanation for it. But it's a relatively slow deck focused on controlling the board, finding opportunities to chip the opponent's leader, and then you want to conserve your Evo points and threaten your opponent with a potential 10 or 12 damage Albert lethal. And even if they play around it, right, it's actually slowing their game plan down. And eventually, when you're both out of Evo points, you usually end up outvaluing them. You're kind of dragging them down to your level. And now both of you are weak, but your deck is specialized for that type of scenario. On the other hand, we have Aggro Sword. So this one's a budget deck. I think a Japanese player popularized this recently. I can't remember who it was, to be fair. It was either Yuri or Species, I think. But anyway, this deck, it's a little bit different from mid-range sword in the sense that, yeah, you still want to control the board early, but you have to be conscious that your deck does not win the attrition game, right? You need to be conscious that you need to drop their life down from 20 to 0. And so the difference is you actually run cards from the early game. You actually run a 1-drop. You run Quick Blader, 1 Damage Storm. And then that can be buffed with, you know, for example, your 4-cost Evo. It's a little bit harder for them to clear everything on your board. And then on top of that, you've even got Stealth from the Squirrel, and you've got buffers on the board. And you're even running copies of Detective just to prevent them from being able to ward up against your Centaur and your Albert. So this deck is a little bit more all-in than the mid-range sword deck, but if you can't afford the Amelias and the Amalias for that matter, then this deck is definitely for you. And that pretty much wraps it up for today's video. If you liked today's video, make sure to give us a like and subscribe. We constantly do meta updates and deck profiles like today, and also we upload high-level gameplay from time to time, piloted by myself. I'm one of the top players in the CO region. I also run a Patreon page, so if any of you are planning on playing the Shadowverse Open circuit next month, make sure to check that out. I do guides, and I'm always happy to coach people to the next level, especially if you are aiming to become a Shadowverse Open champion. And also, we run a website called shadowversemaster.com. So you can check that out. We constantly upload the latest win streak deck lists on the ladder, and also tournament deck lists. And finally, the tier list is updated regularly as I see changes to the meta. So I hope to see you guys next time.